What's up, everybody? Tricks Ridiculous back with another video, and I thought now was a good time to give you an update on my Ms. Marvel Kamala build that I'm currently playing in Avengers. I think this is one of the best ways to play Ms. Marvel, and I think Ms. Marvel, gets a lot of slack for being kind of a beginner character, but actually on the high end, she's one of the best characters in the game and can be played a number of different ways. But this is how I'm playing her. This is kind of a support slash tank Kamala, but the damage is still respectable, but it's absolutely unkillable. You and your team will be completely unkillable, and you'll be in embiggen the entire time, applying status effect, battery effect, damage buff, all that good stuff. It's all here in this package, and I'm going to go over it with you now. Before we do, be sure to like the video and subscribe for more Avengers content. Those are free and easy ways to support the channel, and I really appreciate it. But without further ado, let's jump right into it. Okay, now the build here, you'll notice right away it's not at 175, and that's fine. That's just lack of rating on this character, but all the gear that I've currently got is pretty much what I want. There could be some better stats here or there, but otherwise there's really no changes or no new pieces of gear I'm looking for. The only thing I would do further with this build is take the current gear I have now and just upgrade it to 165. But really, in the gear itself, I'll kind of go over the whole thing. Really the linchpin to the whole build and what really makes it tick, because there's a couple of different things, a couple of different moving parts, but when it all comes together, it works really nicely. But the absolute most important thing and the best thing you can get on Kamala is this perk, Embiggen Assistance. Now, the actual piece itself is largely irrelevant. We are playing a ranged Kamala. We're not really meleeing. So our damage isn't quite as high as if you were a melee Kamala, but the damage, again, is still respectable. But the perk here, Embiggen Assistance, this gives you a 2.2% increased heroic charge rate from Embiggen. Basically similar to other perks that Iron Man, Thor, other characters have. The 2.2 is actually not 2.2. It's much higher. It's not a cheese. It's just a visual glitch that says 2.2. It's really more like 2 times, right? So it's more like 200% instead of 2%. So anytime you pick up an orb, or you're standing in a sonic field, or you just get some otherwise, heroic charge rate increase, heroic charge burst, things like that, you'll actually get 3 times the heroic charge burst that you would have gotten. All right, so that's what this gives you, and it triggers while you're in Embiggen. So because of that, you activate Embiggen, we're going to be in sonic fields constantly. We're going to be generating heroic orbs, which Embiggen does naturally. So we're going to be able to stay in Embiggen indefinitely. Now, while we're in Embiggen, there's a couple of things we can do here. So ranged attacks deal sonic damage, right? So pretty much we're going to be always attacking with our ranged attacks. We're just going to keep throwing fists, right? Dealing that sonic damage and just allowing the sonic to spread to all enemies, right? And while we're standing in that sonic field, we're going to get our Embiggen back, as well as our other abilities back, our high five and our team spirit. And having those available, basically our team spirit, this is really where the support comes in. We're going to be able to activate team spirit probably every 5 to 6 seconds in like a real fight, right? We can, it recharges so quickly that there's no chance of you ever dying. If any of your teammates go down, you can revive them instantly, and you'll just constantly have your support heroic ready to go. Basically, this is it's like a cheat code, right? Like, you're not playing this build, even though, like I said, you're not going to have the most damage. Your team cannot die, right? So this is a real carry build, right? Your team can play whoever they want. Let's say you're doing the raid, your team might not have, a lot of DPS. They might be playing some sus characters, but it doesn't matter. You're going to be able to carry everyone through because they're not going to be able to die while you're playing this build. All right, so I've got this piece here. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. The faultless buff is okay. Sometimes you'll see in the gameplay, we melee once in a while, just to get that damage buff, but we also get damage buff from our chest piece. So we're really using it for the sonic damage. It's got resilience, precision. The might is not necessary, but resilience, precision is fine in the 80s. And then that top perk is a little bit of a bonus if and when it gets activated. We're not relying on Sonic Conduit, but when Sonic Conduit happens, we get 40% extra weak point damage, which is actually a pretty substantial amount. It really does bump our damage up quite a bit. So when it happens, it's nice, but the build functions just fine without it. Coming over to the chest piece, just a very basic reactive buff because we're always in embiggen and we're always have our healing up. We are a tank. We're an absolute tank. So a reactive buff piece, chance taking damage, grants a damage buff. It's an easy choice for this build, right? Damage, reactive buff was always a pretty solid way to get damage buff. Obviously, damage buff has been nerfed and reactive buff has been nerfed. So it's a lower percentage chance now. But when you're in embiggen and you're just laying out on enemies, I mean, you're just a sponge for damage. So you'll see I'll have damage buff up quite a bit in the gameplay, and 90% of the time it's from reactive buff. So just find yourself a reactive buff piece with Valor, Resolve, ideally Resiliency or Precision if you can. The other two perks don't matter too much. Something like Armored in proximity to teammates is nice, but certainly not necessary. We really don't need any more defense than we already have because of just the ability to just cheese our healing and just basically be healing and reviving nonstop. And then coming over here, Marvelous Regalia. This one should come as no surprise. So Precision, Resolve, Valor, absolutely money. Damage buff, to anyone affected by Team Spirit, crit chance, right? Like I said, we're going to have this up. So this turns kind of that support on even further. So even though we can revive our teammates nonstop, in addition to that, we're also going to be giving them some offensive properties, right? So this is where your team is going to be really happy to have you on the squad because one, even if they die, they'll come right back up. But two, they'll constantly have all of these perks active because you're going to be able to just activate your healing on them nonstop, right? So all of this together, and you'll see kind of how it goes in the gameplay. We're going to be absolutely a walking tank. You'll see while we're even doing this, like we'll get pinned down in the corner, we'll get hit, we'll get bobbed around, pinballed around a bit, but the enemies just cannot get us down on Brutal 4, a brutal, challenge 4 on the harm room, custom harm room. So you'll see how that all goes. Now, one of the biggest recent changes to this build is this piece that I'm using right here, the Nornstone of the Bulwark. Now, this is a piece I recommend on a lot of characters. My Thor has this. I'm trying to get it on my Iron Man. But basically, pinpoint Vibranium payload. Chance that a ranged crit attack will activate a Vibranium payload on the target. Now, you can get this on the ranged piece instead of Faultless buff. If you can get ranged sonic damage and then faultless Vibranium payload all on the ranged piece, that's money. Just use that. But if you can get it here, this really works well as well. Basically, we'll give you a chance on a ranged attack to activate a Vibranium payload, and you'll see that happening nonstop in the gameplay. Now, Kamala did not used to be able to do this. It was ever since the recent kind of small patch that was just minor bugs and fixes between 2.4 and 2.5 that allowed this to happen. So this really puts her over the top because prior to this, she could only really do the Sonic, which the build still worked for me. I was still able to do it, but this just puts her to another level because now she's going to be spreading Sonic and Vibranium to all enemies all over the battlefield, staying in embiggen the whole time, being an absolute tank, healing your team nonstop, healing herself nonstop, giving everybody the Marvelous Regalia buff. It's just absolutely fantastic. So this is the setup overall that I'm using. And then I'm just using another Valor piece just because, again, we're going to be in embiggen all the time. So Valor just affects us all the way around. You can use a defensive piece like a Resolve or Resilience ISO, but I find it not necessary because of the amount of healing. And then coming over here, I'm using the Sacred Nornstone now. This is an interesting choice. Some of you might be thinking, why aren't you using the Ring of Nebelung? And the ring is certainly an option as well. But I don't think you actually need it because of the heroic charge rate from embiggen. You'll see in the gameplay, it is fast. You pick up basically one orb and you're back. You basically have your embiggen back. So I don't think the Ring of Nebelung adds enough value to the already completely absurd charge rate we have for us to justify it. I think the Sacred Nornstone has gotten better since they nerfed damage buff. So they took away the crit chance from damage buff, but the Nornstone has crit chance while damage buff is active. So this, it helps a little bit, right? Having the damage buff and not being able to crit. This used to be kind of not useless, but not necessary because the crit you got from damage buff was so high that you were critting regardless. But nowadays, since they took that crit away, this kind of helps get a little bit of it back. And then the extra duration of it, because we're not getting it from our range piece. Normally with characters like Thor or Iron Man or, pretty much anybody range character, you're probably using a targeted buff piece, right? Maybe targeted buff, targeted tachyon surge. If you're using that, you don't really need more duration on your damage buff because you're going to be triggering it nonstop. Like, let's say with Thor, right? You're obviously going to get damage buff with targeted buff with Thor all the time if you're throwing your hammer. So it doesn't need duration. However, with something like this, when we're getting it from a reactive buff, it's not as reliable, right? So getting that extra duration is actually helpful in this case. So that's why we're using the Sacred Nornstone. I wouldn't recommend the Tactagon or any of the other ones. I think Sacred Nornstone is the one to go with in this case. So that's pretty much it for the gear and the stats. Just coming over to the skills, there's really nothing too crazy here. So you can screenshot this. I like to use the Life Spark. You don't have to, but I use Life Spark just because it can be useful in the raid to not get glitched out. And then also, if for some reason you die, you can use it. You can have it there as well. Other than that, though, I mean, you can just use an extra charge and then go with the extra 8 seconds. Honestly, you almost don't even need it because the duration, you'll be able to refresh the duration honestly just as quickly, and then you definitely don't really need double charge because you're going to be restoring it so quickly. You don't really need to bank them, if that makes sense. Okay, so coming over to the heroic assault, dealer's choice. I like to use the push just because you can actually push like spiders, like the sonic spiders in the claw raid, or the horned echoes. You can actually push them off the cliff, which you don't want to do during the big claw fight, but in earlier portions, or even during like the forge encounter, if you're taking the bottom, you can actually just push them right off the cliff and you don't have to worry about them. So that's that's why I take that. But if you like a different one, totally dealer's choice. And then the only other thing that is mandatory here is Fists of Glory, the bottom second tree of the embiggen. Because basically every enemy you defeat while embiggen has a 25% chance to drop a heroic orb. So in the gameplay, you'll see that there are heroic orbs dropping left and right, and it's because of this. Basically, while you're in embiggen, which remember, we always will be, every enemy has a passive chance to drop an orb. So pretty straightforward, and then obviously, like I said, 1 or even 2 orbs and you're completely back up. Other than that, for this mastery tree, just take a screenshot. The only important thing, obviously, just take anything that does like ranged damage. But then the only thing that's just a personal choice is the concussive whiplash, is basically the one that just does an AoE on the range attack. I like this one better. I feel like it hits more enemies and it's faster because, you can kind of just whip it over and over again and just hit every enemy in the way. Some people like the Pierce, the one that actually goes through multiple enemies. This one can work too. It's just a matter of playstyle. I find this one to be a little slower because you kind of have to wait for the fist to go through the enemy to its max distance and then come back. So if you're just trying to melee one guy, let's say you're down to your last enemy, or if you got a couple enemies kind of in a cluster, This kind of still has to go its full duration and come back before you can throw it again. Whereas this one, if you're right up in the enemy's grill, you can just kind of spam it over and over again and still hit all the enemies as long as they're kind of within a cluster. So dealer's choice. I like the concussive one, but if you like the other one, they'll both work. Other than that, that's pretty much it for the mastery tree. Like I said, just screenshot everything else here. And then for the champion, no change from any other character, really. Just crit chance, crit boost, heroic charge rate, perk chance, and then defense. And I like to go willpower just because it's tanky, but everything else is kind of a waste of points. That is pretty much it. That is this Kamala build. Give this build a try, guys. I assure you, your teammates are going to love you for it. It's absolutely money, and you're going to have a blast playing it. This is what I'm currently playing, and until some other way to play Ms. Marvel comes out, or if they nerf this heroic charge rate, which they said they're going to somewhat nerf it. So, let me rephrase. They said it's overtuned. So it's going to probably stay, but just be a little less than the 200% extra that it is now. We'll reassess at that point, but otherwise, until then, this is how I'm playing my Kamala. That's it for this video, guys. I'll leave some gameplay of a harm room right after this. If you like the video, be sure to like the video, subscribe for more content, join the Discord, links in the description. Leave me a comment. Let me know if you're going to try this out or how you're playing your Kamala. That's all I've got in this one, guys.